Well, look, let's talk more about Ukraine. We can welcome to the show Peter Zalmayev. He's the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Peter, thanks for speaking to France 24. Let's start with this question of a truce. Utter cynicism is what Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has spoken about in the face of those attacks, despite this so-called truce. What do you make of that? Why is there plans for a truce if ultimately it's not going to be respected?
Vladimir Putin, I mean, we just have to go by his track record, right? This is not the first time that Vladimir Putin has tried to take advantage of these days that he considers highly symbolic, including the so-called Victory Day, which actually is celebrated the day earlier by all of Europe now. And in fact, Ukraine started celebrating it on May 8th. And before that, there was this idea of a ceasefire during an Eastern Orthodox celebration in Russia, which Ukrainians have also started celebrating differently. The Eastern Orthodox Christmas, for example, particularly Russia is trying to tie Ukraine to these dates that used to unite these two countries, and of course Russia itself has time and again violated the terms of the ceasefire. So there's really no trust left on the part of the Ukrainian side. But it's very actually remarkable that Vladimir Putin took this somewhat humiliating step of beseeching his American colleague, Donald Trump, like calling him and asking him to intervene on his behalf and plead with the Ukrainians to do this. And since then, of course, we just saw the shelling of a Ukrainian town of Poltava, several civilians dead. That just shows you the priorities Vladimir Putin has for pageantry, for symbolism. He doesn't really care about, human lives, whether on the Ukrainian side or his own compatriots.
So you mentioned the intervention by the US there. What do you make of the fact that Russia is scaling down its May 9th parade day? Is that an indication of the way, and we can talk a little bit more about, Ukraine making some more advances. What do you make of this scaled down 9th of May parade this year?
Well, I think in a way it actually bears out the reality that this sort of weaponry that Russia has paraded since the Soviet days, they no longer really have that same decisive role in the battlefield, where Ukraine has been more than able to hold its own using drones, which allows it to resist Russia asymmetrically. And also, we're talking about an increasing sense of paranoia on the part of Vladimir Putin and his coterie. It's been now recently reported by Western intelligence agencies that Vladimir Putin is once again afraid of an assassination attempt on his life. And so he's essentially hiding in ever deeper, ever distant bunkers. And of course, now coupled with the pervasive sense of unhappiness on the part of Russians with the newest sort of crackdowns that Russian government has instituted against various platforms, including Telegram, and before that, of course, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, which have been banned. Coupled with that, I think Vladimir Putin has a renewed sense of fear for his life, and I would say that in this particular sense, it may be justified.
Let's talk on the ground now, because a recent study, notably one by the Institute for the Study of War, has spoken about the fact that Russia lost more territory than it gained in Ukraine. That was particularly in April. Again, is this a reflection of, you touched on Soviet weapons there, is this more know-how on the Ukrainian side? How do you explain this, gaining of territory, if you will, by the Ukrainians?
Well, once again, the answer is the drones. No, we can't, gloss over Ukraine's continuing problems of manpower and the shortages of Patriot missiles to try to neutralize Russia's attacks of ballistic missiles on the capital and other civilian areas. But the drones have allowed Ukrainians to essentially level out, even out the battlefield, where it is actually increasingly costly for either of the sides to go on an attack in a classical conduct of war that we're used to. And so all of a sudden, if 2 years ago, if you remember, we talked about the shortages of ammunition and artillery shells. We talked about 18 millimeter versus 20 millimeter. All of that has become kind of moot because both sides are now engaged in this increasingly sophisticated and AI-based drone technology.
Before
So much so that yes.
I was going to say, Peter, sorry to cut you there, but before the war in the Middle East began, Zelensky had, spoke about concerns of, the impact that this would have on the kind of, the capacity, that's the word I'm looking for, capacity that Ukraine would have in terms of the weapons that were received. Are we feeling a lull? Are we seeing a lull, rather, in Ukraine's capacity on the ground, impacted by what's going on in the Middle East?
I think when it comes to the defensive capabilities, defense of major cities like Kiev, as I mentioned, Odessa, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and others, the civilians will continue to bear the brunt. And increasingly, we see that the Russian civilian areas are also under attack. Sometimes it's collateral damage, interceptor drones that redirect these strikes onto civilian areas. But as tough as it is for civilians, the silver lining is that, once again, the drones have allowed Ukrainians to essentially hold the line, make up for this deficit in manpower. And in fact, in Zaporizhia, which over the last few months, military experts have been warning us may be under threat of Russia's occupation, all of a sudden, the Ukrainians now are on the offensive, as you mentioned, regaining their territory, which is quite unprecedented considering everything we've seen so far in the last 2 years.
I mean, a final word from you, Peter, on diplomacy. You heard in that report just before we began speaking, people saying, that there's this deep mistrust and there is, little happening on the diplomatic front. Once again, what do you make of this kind of lull in diplomacy? The United States helping out for a while. Obviously, their attention is now turned elsewhere, notably to the Middle East. What kind of impact is that likely to have long term on Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine?
Well, it seems that Trump has actually run the course of his tight-knit relationship with Vladimir Putin. It's unclear what he can actually produce when we talk about this diplomacy and by individuals like Kushner and Witkoff, who are not career diplomats, and their expertise, let's put it politically correctly and mildly, limited, both when it comes to Gaza or Iran, where they're also involved, or Ukraine. The major sticking point is that what security guarantees Donald Trump is willing and able to provide Ukraine, and the answer is negligible. We don't see anything that would reassure Ukrainians, and that's why we see how Ukraine is reorienting itself towards Europe, and therefore Donald Trump and his administration do not want to be seen as completely impotent by engaging in another fruitless round of talks, and that's why we see that they're continuously pushed back, where we don't even know whether they will be held again and when.
All right, Peter Zalmayev of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Thanks very much indeed.
Sure.